Welcome, everybody, to the New School. For tonight's program, The Dream of a Common Movement, Selected Writings of Urvashi Vaid. My name is Rachel Schreiber. My name is Rachel Schreiber. I'm director of the New School's Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute, and I'm also a university professor here. I teach U.S. gender history. Tonight's program is sponsored by the Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute, the Lesbian Lives Conference, and the American LGBTQ+ Museum, a great partnership. Partnership with three? Yeah, sure, it's a partnership. I want to just say a few words about the New School's Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute for folks who may not be familiar. We offer a range of exciting programming throughout the year, so we'd love to have you on our mailing list if you're not already, and we really hope to see you again. We also offer here at the New School a graduate certificate in Gender and Sexuality Studies, as well as an undergraduate minor in Gender Studies. Just one note of housekeeping, you will have received an index card on your way in, and we have extras if you need more. When we get to the audience Q&A portion, we'll ask you to pass forward questions written on index cards, and we'll be collecting them and handing them to the moderator. And I also want to just take a moment to thank the New School, this institution, and say that it feels important at this moment to say that this is such a trying time for gender studies, a time of backlash, a time of uncertainty in gender studies, in higher education, and I just feel the need to acknowledge that I am so grateful to be part of an institution that has completely supported gender studies throughout this point in time, and I have many people. When I tell them that I direct a Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute in higher education, they say, "How's it going? Have you been asked to change anything?" And I want to extend my thanks to all of the senior leadership here, but also in particular, Dean Alex Alenikoff, Dean Christoph Cox, who's here this evening, who have really individually said to me, gender studies is so important to this institution, keep doing what you're doing. So we are not changing the course. Before I introduce our next host, I just want to offer some gratitude to members of my team here at the New School who have really contributed to making this event what it is and such a success. Lisa Rubin, Bianco Lomini, Sherry Cohen, Maria Markovich, Tori Green, Caitlin Nickel, Dorian Duncan, and many others. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Julie Enzer from Sinister Wisdom and the Lesbian Lives Conference.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this opening event for Lesbian Lives 2025. I am so thrilled to see everyone here this evening. For those of you who are joining us for the conference over the next 3 days, I welcome you tonight on behalf of the Journal of Lesbian Studies, Sinister Wisdom, and CLAGS, the Center for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. We are thrilled that you are here. If you are not registered for the conference, I thank you for coming tonight, and I invite you to join us for workshops on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. at the LGBT Center, right around the corner, and for a book celebration and reading on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. More information about all of these events are on the conference website, sinisterwisdom.org/lesbianlives2025. We are so grateful to the New School for hosting us this evening and to the American LGBTQ Museum. This is an incredible book. The Bureau of General Services Queer Division will be selling this book and M. Gessen's other recent book on authoritarianism at the end of the event. You will be able to line up and they will sign on the stage for you. I encourage you to get your hands on a copy of this book. During this authoritarian time in our world, support from organizations and institutions to gather together is more important than ever before. We resist by building networks and supporting one another. We have a packed few days for those of you here for the conference. We are all looking forward to thinking and scheming and strategizing and organizing and celebrating all things lesbian and queer. I am so glad you're here tonight. I'm so looking forward to talking to each and every one of you in more depth over the next few days. Thank you so much. Suhaili. And I forgot to write down, but Suhaili is our fabulous program coordinator from the LGBT history, the LGBTQ Museum, LGBTQ plus. Did I get that right, Kate? The LGBTQ plus museum. And so please join me in welcoming Suhaili.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Rachel. Good evening. Welcome to the Dream of a Common Movement, presented by the American LGBTQ plus Museum in a three-way partnership, Rachel, which is possible. Just saying, with the 2025 Lesbian Lives Conference and the Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute at the New School as part of our Lavender Literary Society book club. My name is Suhaili Bautista Carolina. I'm the Chief of Programs at the American LGBTQ plus Museum, and it's truly an honor to welcome you. For those of you learning about us for the first time, the American LGBTQ plus Museum is a new cultural institution dedicated to preserving, researching, and sharing LGBTQ plus history and culture. Our vision is a world where all people experience the joy of queer liberation. In 2027, we'll open our doors as New York City's newest museum, telling stories of queer people across time, place, and identity. The museum will be a space for celebration, remembrance, and connection. A place where queer magic is real, our ancestors are honored, and our stories are told with power and pride. But you don't have to wait until 2027 to be part of our story. You can join us now through public programs like this one, traveling exhibitions, our newsletter, the book club, or by becoming a founding member. Every gift of support, every act of visibility helps build this museum from the ground up. Also, I encourage you to grab a bookmark on your way out and a sticker which has a QR code on the back so that you can stay in touch with us. Tonight's program is inspired in no small part by the life and legacy of Urvashi Vaid, a true force in the LGBTQ plus movement whose vision continues to challenge and guide us. Urvashi believed in organizing across difference. She believed in the moral and political power of collective action. And she dreamed persistently, audaciously, boldly of a common movement rooted in justice, solidarity, and love. It is in that spirit that we gather tonight. This evening, we'll be joined by three extraordinary thinkers and writers who have each carried forward that dream in their own work. Amy Hoffman, writer, editor, and longtime LGBTQ plus activist. Jyotsna Vaid, psychologist, scholar, and writer exploring language, identity, and liberation, and M. Gessen, journalist, author, and a vital chronicler of resistance and queer life. Together, they'll explore the possibilities and the challenges of building solidarity across movements, borders, and lived experiences. At the American LGBTQ plus Museum, we believe in the power of stories, not just to remember the past, but to shape the future. And we believe in gathering, in intergenerational dialogue, and in radical imagination. Because building a more just, joyful, and liberated world requires all of us and all of our dreams. And now, we're going to watch a short trailer from Mike Syer's documentary, There Are Things to Do, a film that honors the life and work of Urvashi Vaid.
She's from Provincetown, Massachusetts. standing behind her as she was giving this incredible speech, and there were 1 million people. I've never looked at 1 million people live before.
And then we came back to P-Town because she'd wanted to write this book.
Now writing probably what will turn out to be the most important book ever written about our movement.
What I'm trying to write about is the future and whether the strategies that we've employed are going to carry us through the 90s into the next millennium.
I heard you speak at the 1993 March on Washington, and it changed my life.
Irv was launching LPAC, the first lesbian super PAC, to gain real visibility and representation, and Urvashi said, this is possible.
When Urvashi and I were talking and meeting with people, was that there wasn't enough spaces in town outside of the bar scene. She wanted to help foster that next generation of young, queer, diverse people.
Does every single queer person experience the level of freedom, let's say, that I experienced living in Provincetown? No.
I think that the reaction, the anti-gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender against all of that right now is like Urvashi always felt, is a measure of how well we're doing. They're that freaked out.
I'm not just here to stand up as a lesbian. I'm here as a woman. I'm here as an immigrant. I'm here against racism. I'm here to change the status quo because I believe in America and I believe in the future of this country.
And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Amy, Jyotsna, and M to the stage.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be asking you questions this evening. But before we start, I think both of you want to read short excerpts from the book.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. It's hard to choose an excerpt, and I have a lot of different notes. So just give me one. Maybe you can start.
I can see how this is going to go.
I can start. This is from a talk that Urvashi gave in about 2015. And she says, in my book, Virtual Equality, I argued that if the LGBT movement ignored the broader dynamics of racism, economic exploitation, gender inequity, and cultural freedom, it would achieve only a partial, conditional simulacrum of equal rights, a situation that I called virtual equality. Some parts of the LGBT community would enjoy legal rights and formal equality, but the institutions that repress, denigrate, and immobilize sexual and gender minorities would not be transformed. A critical part of the queer work ahead involves enabling all parts of our communities to experience freedom, opportunity, and dignity. Right now, significant parts of the queer community experience economic hardships, over-policing, and gender-based bias. An LGBT equality politics that ignores the economic context is, in the end, a politics of exclusion. Redistribution is, in fact, contained in every LGBT policy aspiration. Social services are urgently needed for every LGBT population that is not wealthy. from elders to parents to youth to college students to anyone accessing social service programs like drug and alcohol treatment, mental health counseling, and HIV services. Yet queer leadership is silent and absent on the tax and fiscal debates in Washington, D.C., and in most state legislatures, despite the fact that the destruction of the safety net, defunding, and ever-growing privatization will have severe consequences for LGBT folks. Queer leadership has not yet used its political clout to fight back against the right wing's growth, concerned as it is with reaching across the aisle for legislative compromises. I just want to say one thing about that passage. We deliberately did not correct or change Urvashi's use of gay and lesbian, LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQ+. As you read the book, you notice changes in the words that she uses to refer to us and to our movement. So in this passage, I read it the way she wrote it.
Okay. So this is the passage that I would like to read, and it just simply states Urvashi's what she believes in, and it was from a speech in 2000, and I think it was 2008. I believe fairly conventional things, among them that power yields nothing without a demand and without some kind of countervailing power to win that demand, that organizing to more democratically redistribute power and access is how we will win change, that sex is as central to human beings as food and as potent a motivator in our lives, and that the biggest job of intellectuals is to disturb power and challenge tradition. Disturbing power and challenging tradition guided Urvashi's work throughout her life. And if I may just continue with a few remarks about why I think, or why we both think that this book is particularly timely and relevant in a way that we really didn't imagine it would be,
or hoped it wouldn't be,
as necessary for the current times. So why this book now? Why does it matter deeply? Well, the world has changed dramatically with backlash against queer, trans, intersectional politics underway. The ideas that Urvashi develops around coalitional practice, structural critique, imaginative possibility, politics as imagination, offer intellectual and strategic resources to push forward. The book reminds us also that things do change, and did change quite dramatically in Urvashi's life. She lived through eras in which being gay was criminalized or pathologized, and she witnessed some of the greatest transformations in US LGBTQ history. Reading her work helps us see how far we've come and also how fragile those gains are or can be, which is also something that she recognized, that that change is not going to be always linear, and there will be setbacks. Her optimism is also something that we should be reminded of in this moment as a good resource for us to use. In times when despair or cynicism can feel like an easier way to react, Urvashi's optimistic attitude reminds us that hope is not passive, it requires work. It's a discipline and a practice, and we need to keep imagining a world that not only doesn't exist right now, but needs to exist, and we need to hold on to that vision of that world. Finally, the frameworks that she models resisting assimilation, resisting pure identity politics, and weaving solidarity across different groups and causes are under renewed attack. But this book is a resource to help us extend those models and frameworks that now appear even more necessary, it seems to me, because they are under threat of being eroded. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Urvashi was a very deep, and I was reminded as I was preparing for this conversation, incredibly rigorous thinker who could speak and write in many different registers. She was also a social connector and a social hub, and a very fun and volatile person. And so let's shift registers now, and I want to ask you to tell an anecdote about Urvashi, of your choosing.
Can I start? I have a very short one.
Well, I did think about this, and I wanted to tell a story about when I first met Urvashi, which was around 1980. I went to a conference, sort of like this one. I think it was supposed to decide the future of feminism. And this woman who I'd briefly been introduced to appeared in every session that I went to. And she was so nice to me. And of course, at the time, it didn't occur to me that anybody would be flirting with me. But after the conference, she invited me to dinner. And so I went, and she was running around the kitchen with a million pots going. And at one point, she had this little ball of dough and a special little cast iron pot. And she flattened the dough and put it in the pot and then sort of touched it around the edges, and it puffed up like a balloon. And I was absolutely amazed. And I said, "That's incredible, what is it?" And she said, "It's a puri, I do them all the time." Now, since then, I knew Urvashi for over 40 years. I've had innumerable Indian dinners at her home. She was an amazing cook, and as Am just said, a real connector, so she was inviting people to dinner all the time. Never in all that time did I ever see her make a puri again.
The anecdote I have is from Urvashi's very early childhood, and it's not a particularly funny anecdote, but it's a telling one of how early her approach to authority was. So she was around 6 years old, and my mother and she were somewhere outside in the backyard in the garden, and I don't know what happened, but my mother slapped her. And Urvashi declared in Hindi, and I'll say it in Hindi, then I'll translate for you. She said, "Hum paudhe nahi hain, hum insan hain," which means we are not plants, we are human beings. 6 years old, 6 years old. My mother was so taken by that, she made a vow then and there that she will not hit any of the 3 daughters from then on. It was her earliest act of resistance.
Thank you. And yeah, you can, one of the things that I love about this book is that you can really see the development of the person and the roots of the person from the very beginning, but we'll get to that. You're an unlikely and perfect duo to co-edit a book. Can you talk about how it started and what your process was of putting it together?
Sure. Do you want me to talk about that? Or do you want to talk about it?
I can start and then we can
Yeah. Well, shortly after Urvashi died of metastatic breast cancer, a lot of her friends started talking about how to preserve her work. And first we had an idea, several of us were batting around this idea that we should republish her book, Virtual Equality, because we thought it was out of print. It wasn't out of print, so much for that idea. But I began to think a little more about virtual equality and what Urvashi had done since then. And I thought, really, we don't need to reprint that book. What we need to do is have maybe some excerpts from it, but also to have a collection of her other writings, her speeches, her essays. At the same time that I was thinking that, Jyotsna had also been looking through Urvashi's computer and her archives and also thinking about putting together a collection. And Kate Clinton, Urvashi's partner, said, Amy and Jyotsna, you've got to get together. And so even though the two of us had met only in passing over the years, because Kate recommended this, we began talking and developed a book proposal. And I live in Boston, Jyotsna lives in Texas. We did all of the work for this book on the phone and Zoom and email, and only actually got together in person when we began doing these talks about the book last spring after it came out. So for me, it's been a wonderful experience to actually get to know Jyotsna in person instead of as a voice on the phone or a picture in a square on Zoom.
The same here. What I just want to add is that for me, working on this book was something I never expected to embark on. And, being an academic, over time, I had been sort of informally collecting Urvashi's articles and essays. She would send me clippings over the years, so I had a file on her. But after she passed, it became much more urgent for me to download interviews with her and everything that I could find or that I knew about, because I knew that it would be very important for an eventual archive. So that was the initial motivation, and it was also a way for me to immerse myself in her writings, in her words, as a way to stay connected to her. And in the process, I felt that it wasn't just sort of an act of preservation or emerging out of a sense of loss, but her words were so inspiring and so resonant. Even, speeches she had given 30 years ago have become even, much more relevant in the present moment. So that struck me as, it just seemed that it was an important moment for us to bring out a collection of Urvashi's writings, particularly for younger generations of activists and scholars who may not come to know of her otherwise.
What was your process for deciding what to include, how to structure the book, and what did you argue about?
Well, the book is structured somewhat chronologically, but not totally chronological. So we also wanted it to become clear that there are certain things that, certain themes rather, that continue throughout Urvashi's life. And we'll talk more about some of those. We also wanted to give a sense of who Urvashi was, so that in addition to an introduction by Tony Kushner, who was a close friend of hers, and an introduction by us about that sort of sets the scene for the book. There are letters that Urvashi wrote to her family when she first graduated from Vassar College and moved to Boston and was becoming a community activist. And then it goes on to present some of her earlier speeches and excerpts from Virtual Equality, excerpts from some of her other published work, and a lot of unpublished speeches that Jyotsna was able to find in the archives, which I think is really valuable. It's material that hasn't been out in public before. You want to say something?
And there were a couple of published works that we included that I guess librarians would call fugitive documents that are hard to find, or in more specialized outlets, but that we thought would deserved a wider audience, including this talk that she gave to an Asian American student organization that was published in a special issue of this journal called Amerasia that UCLA publishes, as well as the very personal piece that she wrote on her cancer diagnosis that did appear in a special issue of the Journal of Lesbian Studies, which was focused on lesbians facing serious illness, first-hand accounts of that. So I think we were just trying to include both very well-known and lesser-known, but no less important aspects of her work that showed different dimensions to her.
There were also some pieces in which Jyotsna found several different versions of some of the pieces that, in fact, even some of the pieces that Urvashi had published, because she had a collection of essays that she published, but some of the essays in that book exist in many different versions. So we also were working on sort of putting together a final version of some of those pieces.
You asked, what did we argue about? I don't think we really argued.
No.
But I do remember a couple of times where I wanted to put more and Amy wanted to put less, right?
Yeah, that's really true. My own writing tends to be very compressed and short, and so I guess that's sort of what I'm always aiming for.
I love that you included the letters, and I assume those letters come from a much larger corpus of letters, and they started in 1979 when she is 20 and living on her own for the first time after college, and that was, we think of leaders and thinkers as having been always fully formed in the world, and it's wonderful to read her fretting about getting from one secretarial job to another, or noting that love affairs and cleaning take up a lot of time. But tell me what stories you read in those letters. Like, what do you think the story that the letters tell from? They go for quite a while. They go from 79 to 93, I think?
Something like that.
Yeah. So what's the story?
Are you asking what we intended, why we chose those excerpts, what we intended to convey in those?
I guess I'm asking, when you read those letters, what story do you see them telling?
Well, I mean, there were letters to me and there were letters to our parents, and there's a slightly different tone, of course, to the two. And I think the letters convey that she always wanted us to know what she was doing, what she was thinking, what she was aspiring to do. And the letters were a very tangible way of sort of chronicling, her her growing interest in activism as a career. You know, in editing the letters, I wanted to respect her privacy on the one hand and just focus more on giving a little bit of a flavor of her life, her everyday life, the texture of her life, but also just see it as a first-person account of how she ended up, where she ended up in those very critical years, and how fortunate it was that they're documented in her own words.
Amy, what do you read in them?
I have to say, it's hard for me to read the letters. They're written during a time when she and I were involved with each other and when I was first getting to know her. And I was actually surprised to find them because her relationship with her family, her parents at least at that time, was not easy. She had recently come out to them, and it was hard for her mother, I think, in particular, to understand that and to accept it. And I was quite aware of that in my relationship with her. And I was seeing her mostly in relationship to me, but also one of the things Urvashi was doing that was really important to her was living in a group household in Allston, Massachusetts, which is a neighborhood of Boston. She'd organized her household into a study and action group. They were all part of the Boston co-op, food co-op. They were doing a lot of organizing against violence against women. And as you said, you know, she was very busy with love affairs and household issues as well. So I saw all that from a very different side, from the way that I didn't know that she was presenting all of this to her parents and her sisters, as well as living it with her friendship network and what would become her queer family. So I was surprised to see the letters, and they were kind of a revelation to me.
And these were also part of that, were the GCN years, the Gay Community News. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I had told I wanted to talk about GCN.
I have to say, the second then I would say gay and lesbian thing that I went to at the age of 15 was stuffing envelopes on a Friday night at GCN. So,
yeah. Well, stuffing envelopes was so we had to stuff envelopes because we could not send out a newspaper called Gay Community News. It had to be in a sealed brown envelope. Otherwise, people were afraid to receive something like that in the mail. So because of that, on Friday evenings, multitudes of people from Boston would come and stuff GCNs into the envelopes and sort them out for mailing them and take them to the post office. And just about anybody I meet in Boston who was there at that time was stuffing envelopes at GCN. But I did want to say that Urvashi was a liberationist. The word is not used often in these days, but a liberationist perspective is still with us. LGBTQ liberationists believe that our movement is one that works for social justice for all, and that queer culture is unique, and in its emphasis on sexual liberation, bodily autonomy, and joy, it's valuable. LGBTQ people are multidimensional, and our movement must be also. Urvashi explained liberationist politics as leave no queer behind. Not an immigrant, not a person of color, not a poor person, not a transgender person, not a lesbian, not anybody. Urvashi was one of the most powerful spokesperson for the people for the liberationist point of view that we've had. But how did she get that way? I believe it was GCN, Gay Community News, a weekly paper out of Boston that published between 1973 and the late 1990s. She was part of a cohort of GCNers who worked at the paper in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The experience was formative for her and me and numerous others. We grew up at GCN politically, personally, and sexually. A liberationist perspective came to us organically. It was nearly unavoidable because of the people who worked there. I say worked, but actually the staff was very small and was paid $50 a week, and the majority of the people who wrote and edited and proofed the articles, laid them out, and mailed them to subscribers were volunteers. GCN members had been institutionalized because of their sexuality, had been thrown out of their families, jobs, homes, and doctors' offices, had been arrested and imprisoned, beaten and murdered, had been shunned for wearing what? For wearing the wrong clothes. They had histories of drug addiction and insanity. Many were simply wildly eccentric. Outcast, weird, and queer everywhere else, at GCN, these people were our heroes. So it became obvious, at least to most of us, that a narrow rights strategy would never be enough. We knew too many whom legal benefits would fail to benefit. Urvashi points out that poor people, immigrants, people of color, disabled people, and other marginalized people can't gain access to an expensive and confusing system in order to enforce their rights, and they need more than a gay rights law to live healthy, satisfying, productive lives. And I think that's enough for now.
Thank you. So in Boston, Urvashi went to law school, which I learned from the letters she was quite conflicted about undertaking, and then moved to DC to work for the ACLU, and then later moved over to the National, I think, Gay then Task Force. And in one of the letters from DC, she writes to her parents, inviting them to stay with her in DC, noting, despite our inevitable arguments and annoyances. What did they argue about?
Everything.
Say a couple of words about your parents. They're remarkable people.
I mean, if you remember what Alok had said at the memorial for Urvashi, at argument.
Say who Alok is.
Alok Vadman and my child, Urvashi's
Nibbling.
They had said that arguing was their love language between. And I think that it is a very Indian trait. I'm not going to excuse, I think our family had more of it than typical Indian, but argument, arguing is just what we do about about anything and everything. And we were raised in a way to argue about things from an early age. So, and Urvashi in particular was very clear that, that she is going to express her views, and if our parents are not ready to, they haven't arrived at a certain level of consciousness, Urvashi was going to make sure that they would.
And this, I think, is a question for Amy, but Jyotsna, also please feel free to jump in. I think the most surprising part of the book for me was this talk, Race, Power, Sex, Citizenship, and the LGBT movement. And surprising because when I looked at the date, I kind of got whiplash. It's a talk that she gave in April 2008. So Obama's nomination isn't anywhere near locked in. And she gives this talk about needing not to be lulled into complacency by his candidacy. Explain. You, both of you. I mean, Jyotsna is nodding.
Yeah, I'll pass that to Jyotsna.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was probably a reflection of her own experience in the movement too, and her observations that, and I think, I don't know if it was in that essay that she writes about the price of admission, is to lose your identity, and she gives examples, I think, of Condoleezza Rice, and I don't know if it was in that speech, but and she talks about Asian Americans as being model of acquiescence, model minority in acquiescence. So she definitely was worried that, that we not get overly excited by this, because she knew the trade-offs and the costs of being accepted. And she also, I think, wrestled with, that on the one hand, if we remember when Obama was elected, how we all thought that it was such a historic moment, and that, racism is something we don't have to worry about that much, or very naively, of course. But Urvashi was very well aware that misogyny was much harder to eradicate at that time. Of the two evils, sexism hasn't really made much progress, or the fight against sexism, and that's a theme that she kept bringing up as well.
Yeah, I don't know if she would have prioritized them in quite that way, but I think, and that election, because there was also, Hillary Clinton's candidacy, which she very much supported. And so, I don't like to, I don't want to say that there's, gender thing, it's either gender or race. I mean, that's not what's going on there. But I think she was very excited about the possibility of having a woman running the country, and that didn't happen.
This is a question for both of you. The last essay on activism and politics is from 2019, so it's a full 3 years before Urvashi's death. Why is that? And can you also talk a little bit about this essay, which is on embracing outsider activism?
The short essay that was in the Nation?
It was in the Nation, yeah.
Yeah. I really like that essay. I felt like it's a very short piece. She wrote it in response to a call for pieces about the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And it's called something like, "We Need More Outsider Activism Again." And I think she's speaking to the kinds of people that I was talking about before, who worked at Gay Community News, that she did not want to see our movement sort of sucked into the mainstream. And she felt like we had, as queer people, we had a lot to offer that she did not want to see disappear. And it was particularly appropriate to write about that during the first 50th anniversary of Stonewall, because so much of that sort of did appear mainstream. And And one thing I just would add that seemed totally left out of those celebrations, and it was great to celebrate it and to celebrate our movement, but there was almost no discussion about AIDS during that whole time.
Can I just sneak in a quote from the book that kind of speaks to that?
Please.
Which I had been looking for earlier. So what I really like about a recurring theme in Urvashi, in the book, is how Urvashi keeps insisting that this assimilationist view is simply not the way to go. And this is a kind of a famous quote from her: by aspiring to join the mainstream rather than figuring out all the ways we need to change it, we risk losing our gay and lesbian souls in order to gain the world. And then, but she extends this idea of the need for transforming not just institutions, but even our notions, or sort of our what we hold to be given, and that those need transformation as well. So she imagined liberation not just in terms of formal legal rights, but also in terms of how we define what is good and what is evil. And she, said in a 2008 speech, gayness is a moral good, sexuality is good, and sexual freedom, defined as the cultural transformation and opening up of ideas of sex and gender, must also be an integral outcome of our struggle for full human rights. One more quick paragraph, to indicate that she offered the gay and lesbian community as a model and as an alternative model for other forms of intimacy and resilience and care. And I think that is a really important aspect of her writing, is that she insists that we see the good and the positive in these alternative ways of being. She said, our subcultures turn pain into caring, referring to the AIDS crisis. Our institutions deliver services, resilience, and humor instead of bitterness and violence. Our extended kinship structures deliver emotional and material support, independent of blood ties. Our community is full of exceptional acts of generosity and affiliation with those who are social and political outcasts. So I think there's a strength.
And I wonder if, actually following up on that, if I can ask you about Urvashi's illness. And she dealt with cancer off and on for 10 years. And I think when somebody we love is so ill and dies, it teaches us a lot about ourselves, and but also about them and how they construct community and how they think their lives. So can I ask you both to talk about your experience and observations of that?
Yeah, it's, I think one of the things that's important to know is that one of the first things Urvashi did when she was diagnosed was put together a group, which is very Urvashi. She had a support group of other women who were dealing with breast cancer on one level or another. So she immediately had a network of people who she was caring for and who were caring for her. It was a very mutual thing. In her essay in the book, she writes, which I found just sort of heartbreaking the first time I read it, she talks about that in a much larger way, about how our society deals with illness and caring. And so I think I don't know, that's one lesson I took from it. And I think, actually, I want to go back to the AIDS epidemic again, because I felt like we learned how to do that. I mean, we knew how to do that even before then, because of the kinds of violence and oppression that we experienced as queer folk. So when the AIDS epidemic happened, and there was no, we knew, the state or the medical institutions, none of that was going to do anything for us. We had to care for our people ourselves, and I think we took those lessons with us in life, and to the breast cancer epidemic as well.
And I just want to note that you write about that beautifully in your book, Hospital Time.
Thank you.
It's hard for me to answer that question. I'll just share in one of the phone calls I had with her in her last year or so. I said, if you have cancer, something like you have to be very brave. Oh no, I said, I've totally botched it, but we both acknowledged that having cancer forces you to be brave, because you just have to rise to that occasion and have to be strong. And I must say that, she acknowledged her vulnerability at times, but for the most part, she was very determined to not let it overtake her life or define her, and she kept focused on the initiatives that really mattered to her, and especially that 22nd Century Initiative at the end was very important to her. And she was as present in our lives and, as she was before, and very caring, and we would interact regularly. And so in that sense, she had every intention. She wanted to live to her 80s, as she told all the doctors that do what needs to be done. I plan to be around, so which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, I want to add something, because throughout her illness, she continued to teach. She was teaching a class at Columbia. She would go for treatments and then immediately go to her classroom. She continued to cook, to have people to dinner, to do all that kind of personal networking that she had always loved to do. She continued to dance with us and to play music for us. She, until really almost the very end.
This is my final question before we open up to the audience. And yeah, we have index cards. So you mentioned the relevance of this book in the Trump era. And I'm sure this would be happening anyway, but particularly after having immersed yourself in the editing of the book, as you walk around in this time and in this world, as you see or participate in the No Kings protest last weekend, what bits of Urvashi do you hear in your head? Because I'm sure you do. Like, what would you say, or what has she said to you?
At this point in our book talks, I've often turned it over to the audience. We gave a talk in Provincetown, which the organizers called "What Would Urvashi Do?" And so I was trying to think of what would Urvashi do, and realized I don't have all the answers to that. But what happened was that I kind of turned it back to the people who were attending the talk, and they began thinking about not only what would Urvashi do, but what would I do, and what am I doing, and how am I making commitments to resist. So I just hope that throughout the conference this weekend, and when you go home, you'll be continuing to think about that. I had one more thing to add about that.
Please.
We used to make fun of Urvashi because whenever she gave a speech, she would say, "There are 3 things we must..." And we said, "Urv, do you always know what the 3 things are?" And she said, "No, but I'll figure it out by the end."
By the time I've said the second thing, I'll figure out
The third thing will come to me. And actually, in the book, you see that. She's enumerating things all the time. But I tried to think of 3 things. And I have to also give some credit to Richard Burns, who helped me figure this out. But so here's 3 things. Urvashi would say, organize, of course, that was a word she loved. Among your networks, your community, your legislative district, your movement, host a potluck, organize an action, get out the vote. More, think of more. Write letters to the editor, write op-ed columns, write letters to your local and state and national representatives, write letters home, write leaflets, write blogs, write grant applications, and third, raise money. Urvashi was an amazing fundraiser because of all of her networks among activists and philanthropic organizations. Not all of us have those contacts, but as Urvashi writes, there are things to do. Even small contributions, if there are enough of them, as we know, can make a big difference. But maybe even more important than the money is that it gives you a sense of engagement and ownership of the organizations that you're contributing to. Contributing money often means more than simply a monetary contribution. So also, in the end, think about what would Urvashi do, and what am I doing, and what would I do?
Thank you.
So here are some lessons that I think we can take away, that what Urvashi would want us to do. First, we can recognize that movements are made of relationships, not just rhetoric. So we actively build coalitions and listen across differences. And I know that's very hard. It's getting much harder. Second, I think an important lesson from Urvashi's life and work is that to recognize that intersectionality is a strategic imperative. It's not just a convenient slogan, and that it's the way defending it means practicing it, and it's definitely under threat. And third, I think on a more deeper level, she would say that change requires both imagination and action. And for me, when I was reading the essay on 10 lessons of activism, the first lesson was really resonated with me, which was the idea that you have to start by imagining the impossible, imagining the kind of world that you want to make or to create or to live in. And it may seem like that's not achievable or possible, but you have to have faith that that can one day be possible. So her view of politics as an act of faith, I think, is very refreshing, and it reframes political activism and distills it into its kind of purest moral good.
I mean, the role of the imagination is so important, and one thing we haven't even gotten to in this discussion is Urvashi's involvement in the creative arts. She loved music. Patti Smith was her most admired person, and but her musical taste was all over the place. It was eclectic. Her life partner was Kate Clinton, who was a brilliant comedian, and Urvashi was a huge supporter of that. She was a reader. She was a writer. She was an appreciator of the visual arts. All of that is really important to her politics. It's part of her politics. In a time like this, I think she believed that that's what we need in order to imagine. We need creativity, and we need people who work in those fields to help us find a way forward.
So most of the questions from the audience are some variation on what would she say now, what advice would she give us? And you even started answering another question from the audience, which is, what and who did Urvashi like to read? What art, which poets, novelists, filmmakers, artists? The questioner didn't ask about musicians, but you already answered that.
She read a lot of political science. She read a lot of nonfiction. She loved poetry. She loved the poetry of Auden, and which she often quoted. I'm trying to think of other poets.
Adrienne Rich.
Adrienne Rich, of course, and the title of the book, which was the brilliant idea of Jyotsna, is a play on a book, on a line from Adrienne Rich, who said, the dream of a common language. Yeah.
She was an admirer of James Baldwin, June Jordan, Angela Davis.
Is that enough?
That's good. That's great. Another audience question. You've talked about how outspoken Urvashi has been. Even at an early age, she had no issues standing up against authority. What advice would you have for others to follow in her footsteps, especially when advocating in that way isn't easy? If it's easy, you're not doing it right.
I don't think it was easy for Urvashi either. It's hard for everybody. And it's hard, especially now. Jyotsna and I have been talking about how difficult it is to be in academia right now. There's so much repression going on, and so much censorship of important ideas. And so this is a particularly hard, and people's lives and careers are being devastated. It's having, this repression is having very real consequences for, people we know. So it gets harder and harder to do the work of resistance. But I think in the it's also more and more worth it, I suppose, because we can't live with the awful consequences of the repression that we're experiencing.
And Jyotsna, what do you think made it possible for Urvashi?
I think she would emphasize reaching out to people so that you combat that sense of isolation and realizing that we are all really in this together, and that just getting getting people together in person and will give you a strength that you might not feel you have if you feel you're alone and are hesitant to speak out. So collectivity, I think, is the key, and community, that's the other key.
Thank you. That is a great word to end on. Yeah. Thank you for coming. This is a great book. It's full of joy and inspiration and wisdom. and the co-editors are going to be signing, right? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
The co-editors will sign the books. They're available for sale from the Bureau of General Services Queer Division right outside the auditorium. Buy your books, The Dream of a Common Movement, and then rush up to the stage where they will stay and sign and kibitz with you and do all of the things. The Bureau also has M. Gessen's Surviving Autocracy, if you'd like to buy that. The New York Times says, when Gessen speaks about autocracy, you listen. And also, Amy didn't talk that much about it, but Amy Hoffman is a wonderful novelist, and 2 of her novels are also available from the Bureau this evening. Please purchase books, stay around, talk to one another, come up and have your book signed. I know some of you already have copies of the book, so just come right on up. Don't hesitate to be first. And for those of you who are joining us tomorrow, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at the Graduate Center. Thank you to the new school. Thank you to everyone involved this evening. And thank you to our editors.